feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, and the ladies, welcome back to another episode of the pod. We got our boy, hey, look, I'm going to learn your last name here at some point, all right? Steve Canderelia?
Close enough, it works.
No, tell me how to say it. I'm gonna
Candelaria.
Candelaria. That's the Candelaria, right?
Right.
Candelaria. Look at me. Got it down now. I'm just keep calling you Candy though. But we're back. Today, I think it was a pretty cool podcast just because I know that this is I've talked to a couple different strength coaches, a lot of different areas, and one of the things that we were just talking about as well is that a lot of people haven't had a lot of experience with using water within training. I have used it a lot because I think it first came into more from like a trainer in the sense of like a skill coach area, but then also too, once we started using it for that a lot, then myself, I started using it when I was actually training and then adding a lot of volume to it. And so like now when I use it with a lot of my core stuff and a lot of things that when I'm training from that side, and I've seen and had a lot of benefits from that. And then we were kind of just talking about it. And I was like, man, like I think a lot of coaches, us to talk about it, like again, like anything else, right? It's like, should you only have a barbell? No. Should you only have a kettlebell? No. Should you only have a dumbbell? Should I only have med balls? No. Like at the end of the day, like water bags, again, from a base standpoint are only a tool that could be used and all those things, but there's some benefits of obviously using it. And just to lay a foundation here for us as well. Yes, we now have water bags in here, but this isn't just like a pump water bags because we have them. We were using water bags. I've been using water bags far before we ever had our own. We for years had, probably about 4 years before we actually ever sold water bags. I've been using water bags. And then obviously, like Florida Baseball Armory, notoriously in my head, it was like the big, training facility that's been using them for far long, probably almost a decade now, where close to a decade now where they've really been using them as well. So I thought it'd be good for us just to have a conversation of, what they could really be used for. And then you also, from my experience as a skilled coach, and then also for, you from the strength side too, as well, like where you find them, like where they're applicable. And then also too, where maybe they're not so useful also as well. And us just have like a conversation where like they can be better applied and people can kind of better understand like how to utilize them as well.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing I'll say, ask with you too, Candy, is like, I think this other thing is for your experience, I think you've obviously done a whole bunch of strength training where there was zero water bags, right? And they're never used at all. And then now that you've also been in-house and like we've been utilizing them and you gotten to play around with them a little bit more. And then also, from that, just like off the bat, for more of an experiential thing of you just kind of like being here as well, like what have you kind of feel or experienced or maybe explain the mindset of, kind of coming from a world that you didn't use them at all. And then kind of like what you've also experienced kind of just being here now.
Yeah, I think I was introduced to water balls probably about 4 years ago, and Franz Bosch was my first influence with that.
Yeah, he's the guy.
Yeah, he is. He's got some good stuff out there. Yeah. But what I've found just in my industry is you have the truthers, the guys that love the water balls, and then you also got the haters, you know what I mean? And then the in-between is we just don't know yet, right? Like there's not a lot of evidence out there from, in compared to what we have evidence for other things, but also too, like when you look stuff up, there's not a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
You have to go sift it out and find it out. It's starting to become a little bit more prevalent, but, I think there's a bunch of different ways that you can use them. I think your intent really matters. And I think the population that you're using them with really matters as well. So,
yeah, why don't you, I know this is a simple idea, but I know a lot of people don't think about this. You use a word there that a lot of people misuse a lot. And I know what you meant by it. So I wanted you to kind of explain. When we say intent, when you say that, what does that mean to you? I know a lot of people just use intent, meaning like, do it as hard as you can, like do it with some intent, right? Where, why don't you break down what intent actually means when you use the word intent?
Yeah, I mean, simplified, it's just you're looking for a specific training adaptation, right? You can use, and I'm sure we'll get down into it down the road, but it is just a tool. It's not an end all be all, just like a dumbbell is just a tool.
Yeah.
Right. I think in my experience right now so far with water balls, one of them is challenging joint stability and posture. I think those are two really important factors, and I think the weight of the ball actually matters. We have youth athletes in here that, I'll see jumping left and right, and they have zero pelvic stability.
Yeah.
And, that ball might just be too heavy, or fundamentally they just don't have the right musculature to stabilize in those planes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think going back to the intent, like, what's my intent with this athlete? Am I training to help with stabilization, to help with balance, or am I training this athlete to help reemphasize a new motor pattern? Am I helping this athlete try to take slack out of their system? But, first and foremost, I think the water balls, as soon as you pick one up, your core's activated, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about slack. We talk a lot about spacing. We talked a lot about cross body patterns and things like that. So, if you think about, I think something that I'll probably talk about a little bit throughout this podcast is active versus passive. Those are two things that I look at. You could passively get into a position by just like putting yourself there, or you could actively jump into that position and you have to stabilize in that position, right?
Yeah, it could be big. I think also too, I mean, for us to remember, literally going back to that, is like intent is short for intention, right? And what is my intention for this athlete, or why are we doing this exercise? And a lot of times we run past that. We see exercise on social media and we have no idea what the intention is. You could do the same exercise for 10 different athletes and have a different intention. That same one exercise could be a whole different adaptation that we're trying to get from different athletes, or it might be very similar, or what somebody might be getting out of it. I mean, I know that we talked about this too. It's like you could be doing the same exercise, but for me, well, that requires me to, like, I have a weaker adductor or something like that, and I might be feeling like my adductor is on fire right now, and somebody else, it might be, again, like their right glute or something, like, like that could be firing for them, or like, again, what their adaptation is going to be for them compared to me could be obviously very different. And then also too, like you said, we could change slight variations within the exercise, that if you're watching it on social media, or if you're, you don't know what, for that athlete, we might have made a slight alteration. Maybe it's the orientation. Maybe it's, again, you're telling that guy to screw his foot like outward, or, again, press his, big knuckle of his big toe, like into the ground or something like that. Right. Where if you're watching on social media, you have, and you're not there, you have no idea.
Looking at those things.
You have no idea. Right. So I just want to point that out. One of the things I wanted to point out is the concept of load, right? We constantly, a lot of people think load and they think just like more weight, right? From the CNS, like, that's not always the case. And I want to give this example and kind of wanted to have you break this down, because I've seen this and a lot of people have never seen this in real time and they're like, no way.
Yeah.
But like, for example, like I was one of these guys. Great. Like, let's say I've seen guys that can, squat over 400 something pounds, and then you put some instability into that, that pattern, and immediately, like, they can't do a quarter. Like for me, for example, like I was deadlifting over 500 pounds, and I remember I'd go to like a single leg and I'd go to like an RDL. Like there was times I couldn't even stabilize like 20 pounds, on a single leg RDL. But I could deadlift 500 pounds. Right. And it's like, okay, there's obviously some big differences between that. And again, when it comes to like the CNS there, right, like the load is very different, and it's not just weight. Could you kind of like open that up as well, of like, why that would happen, for an athlete that appears to be so strong at something, but when you go to something else that it might be similar, it's still a, now it's unilateral or something like that, right? Like, why does that instability, why is the CNS kind of like respond in that way?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest example I could probably give is just, you have large muscles and small muscles. Let's use the shoulder, for example. Like, your large muscles for your internal rotators, you're probably looking at your pec, your lat, your teres major. And then on top of, I guess not on top, but probably more or less underneath, you're looking at your rotator cuff, right? You got four little small muscles that are inside of there, and those help stabilize the shoulder joint as you're going through range of motion. Yeah. But you also have those large prime movers that help with velocity, that help with power, right?
Yeah.
And so, for me, like somebody that's just training a squat and then you take them to a single leg, like, they probably very well developed their hamstrings, their quads, their glutes to lock them into those positions. But, you're also looking at an adductor, you're still looking at glute med, like you're still looking at these frontal plane muscles that help stabilize, right? So for me, that's kind of just like my thought process with like how I'm adjusting and altering loads, especially with an athlete and the water balls.
Yeah.
You know, it's very easy to see what clean movement looks like and what bad movement looks like. And,
Yeah.
you know, without getting too, you know, far down rabbit holes with
Yeah.
weights and loads and things like that, like
Yeah.
if you're just a dad or a coach out there watching these athletes, if that movement does not look good and you're putting that athlete more at risk, let's back off of the water just a little bit, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Here we have 4 different weights that we use.
Yeah.
We have tons of different athletes that use them, right?
Yeah.
But we
And a billion variations of different exercises that, again, progressions, regressions, like, again, they might not be able to do something with that weight, right, of ball, right? And again, a lot of times, speaking of that, right, like when we talk about the different weights that we have, right, even the bag typically is going to have more water than the Bulgarian or the water ball, right? Water ball usually has the least amount of water out of all of it, but also too, it's the most dynamic, and you can use it in a lot of, you know, specific ways that might be very challenging to the CNS and, you know, ranges of motion where, you know, and then also, you know, again, let's say like the Bulgarian, because it typically is being wrapped around like T-spine area and like and pressed out, it's more connected to the trunk. It's a little bit
it's more part of your body.
Yeah, it's more easier to stabilize and things like that as well. So we, again, could load that up a little bit more. I think one of the things I brought up with Randy Sullivan, I said this the other day, because when I went out to Oregon, for example, they had water bags, like all that stuff. But the water bags were like almost completely full. Like, I mean, the whole bag was almost full of water, right? To the point where like the water wasn't really swirling back and forth. Like you're not getting that perturbation. You're not getting so much instability. It literally just became almost like a weight, right? Where it's like, it's just one solid weight. The water really can't, there's nowhere for it to move and shuffle. And that unpredictable load, you know, it can get to that place where the body and the CNS has to respond. And again, co-contractions, all these things that, you know, we can get into as well. But I think that the thing is like, for example, like we forget from the skill side is every time we're striding, every time we're hitting a baseball, every time we're doing something dynamic, you know, to the body, like that load is going to be unpredictable. Like how I land, the surface that I'm on, how much, you know, like specific, like you cannot swing the exact same twice. Like the pattern is going to be slightly different. You're going to land slightly different. You're going to push slightly different. How'd you sleep last night? Were you tight today? You know, like, again, like where was the pitch? Like all of these things, like slightly different posture, slightly different this, everything's, you know, like with it, right? Like even the fact that, like when you did the bat, just like the timing, if you slightly are off by 1,000th of a second, right? That is changing the movement and the load and like what muscle now has to compensate or whatever has to happen. And I think with that, as we start to think about, like, even though that's true, we're training to be as consistent as possible, of course, right? But with that being said, the body, it's impossible to actually have the exact same load every single time. So that's one thing that, like, let's say like a dumbbell or something like that, right, as well, like, because it's so consistent and so like isolated, and again, depends on the exercise, of course, about how dynamic it is and like all the things you do with it. But with that being said, it's obviously much more predictable, you know, to the body than it is where if Randy Sullivan talked about it like this, when you get on a roller coaster, right, and you get on a roller coaster, we create like pre-tension, right? Because you don't know, you know, like you've never been on this roller coaster before. You don't know the next turn. You don't know where it's going to shove your body, and you start creating this tension in your body to create stability, right? Like you don't know what's about to happen. Or if you've ever been in the ocean, right, and it's like you're in a wave or something like that, right? Like you're getting thrown around and like your body's in like protection mode, right? And it's just trying to create stability and protect you. And like that's a large way as well as like you get to like the fundamentals of movement. Now your brain and your CNS is like everything is going around the spot of it's trying to protect you before it's trying to perform, right? Like, can you walk away from this, right? The only time that we generally can change that thought process is, again, if there's an override of I'm going to die. If like, you know, like again, let's say there's a train coming, you're stuck underneath a car or something insane where your body, like your brain knows that like, I would rather tear my bicep right now than die. Right. So like you can override that system in certain ways too. But like, I think that's also like, as we start to talk about that with, you know, like load, or we start to get into some of that, is like having the basis of understanding that like fight or flight, like also in our brain's main, job is to keep us alive.
Yeah, it's trying to protect itself.
It's huge. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, just what you said about like the example of being in the ocean, like there's your active versus passive. Like another, analogy could be you're just standing on normal ground, right? And you take one step and you step onto ice. Like that's a prime example of like your body starts to tense up to search for stability, right? Trying to protect itself.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it's like, what does your body do? It increases the attention, right? Yeah. But now your mindset, your body, without you even thinking it, it's moving from the middle out, not from the outside in.
Yeah, innate. Yeah.
So, that's to me, the water balls are huge for that. It's like, and again, exercise selection does matter, and it does matter with specific athletes. We're not just throwing tons of water balls out there and say, have at it, kids. Like,
100%.
There's still structure to training.
Yes.
But also too, like we look at plyometric exercise, like there's only a certain amount of ways that you can overload plyometric exercises. This is a great way to, increase load. You can change the load on the spot.
Yes.
And again, like obviously when you're talking about like the stretch shorten cycle, the tighter and shorter and faster that you can contract in a short amount of time, the more explosive you're going to be, right?
Yeah.
And so like as you're jumping left or right or you're lunging forward, your body already has tension in it. So it's going to be able to counteract that eccentric move with the concentric move a little bit faster. And basically like that's just going from down to up in a jump. I can go from down to up faster. And that's a good way to overload that. Another option would be box drop, right? Like a depth drop. But also too, like each time you're bouncing side to side, like you're training that stretch shorten cycle to be faster and faster and faster. And to me, that's another, I wouldn't say predictor of injury, but what I've seen with the force plate stuff is they call it, RSI, but it's just basically like reactive strength index. And that means is like, how fast, again, can I go from down to up? And I need to shorten that amount of time because that also like the wider that gap is, the slower that athlete's going to be and the less force they're going to produce. Right. So
makes a lot of sense.
We go back to intent and it's like, no, this isn't just my training tool. Like I'm supersetting that with maybe a strength movement. Right.
Sure.
And so like I'm progressively overloading plyometrics. And as I taper out through a program from a hypertrophy to a strength to a power program, my load's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter with that ball, right? Because I want that athlete to move faster and quicker.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing that's super like big with that as well, like a lot of times like strength coaches are, they can get this perception again, like a lot of times we're using water balls and also like for example, like a water ball, typically we're like 4 to 6 pounds is like usually in there. And we typically don't go much heavier than that. And then so people would be like, okay, well, they want to load it up. They want to add all this extra weight. They want to do all these other things. And it's like, well, one of the things also with load and some of the things that we're talking about as well, it's like, well, if we also, it's not that you can't go heavier, but also it's also from a system perspective. Can you train one system without training the other? Like, no. But can we start to target more of one system than the other? Like, yes. And I think that's one thing as well, is like when we're going into training, right? It's like, for example, is, if we're having more of like a connective tissue focus comparatively to, I want them to recruit, again, like, well, yeah, like a barbell might be again, what's my intention? Like if I'm trying to get this other adaptation, like, yeah, I would go and do these other things. But for example, like the same thing is like I was telling you, and we've talked about this on the last pod, where it's like, I would go and lift a ton, right? Even when I was doing powerful movements, even when I was doing things explosively, even when I was doing plyometrics, even when I was doing all those other things. And then I would go back and do Muay Thai and I would be slower, right? And it would be like, okay, right? But then if I'm doing just Muay Thai, right? When I wasn't doing strength, all of a sudden I get, and my punches were harder, faster, snapping, like my sequencing, my timing, all those other things were much better. And it was like, does that mean that I should never do plyometrics? Does that mean that I should never do strength? Does that mean that I should never do those? Like, no, right? But I also saw that with our athletes when we come from the skilled component of like hitting, for example, right? Is because we can get so specific within the, exact vectors and some of the, because, we talked about this last week about like, like mat strength, right? And like how unique, like being strong in weird vectors, right? Or being strong in very small windows, right? That you need to be strong for that specific sport, right? Again, there's certain things you need to be strong at in Muay Thai or jiu-jitsu or soccer or football or whatever, right? And depending on position, depending on what that skill is, that person has to be really strong. Like, let's say you're an arm wrestler, let's say you're whatever, right? Like, you need to be strong in different things than a baseball player needs to be. And again, your core needs to be strong in different ways than other athletes, right? And is there overlap? For sure. But is there differences based on, because everybody, it's like we did this wave, right? The roller coaster of like, we went, oh, specific, like baseball specific, all these other things, right? And then everybody right now is like, kind of dumping on like specificity, like, oh, well, if he doesn't have a baseball in his hand, then that doesn't mean that it's specific. It's like, yeah. But like, again, though, there is things based on the sport that are very, like, again, if I play ice hockey, it's going to be different than if I play a different sport, right? And there is things that are very important. Like if I'm a kicker, he's going to have to be strong in different ways compared to a wide receiver. Like, like the wide receiver doesn't need to kick field goals 45 yards. Like that's not what he needs to do. Like kickers can kick the ball like they do with the consistency that they have, with the stability that they have, with how accurate they need to be, because of like training the skill actually is going to get them very strong in that way. And I think from the skilled side, it's okay, well, I'm trying to get them more skilled, and skill isn't just, people look at it as like just pure technique, but it is those very unique vectors, that very unique stability, that very unique, from the CNS system, like the firing patterns, very unique stability and co-contractions when I need them, where I need it, and what also from me doing this activity, I think it even from the brain, right? For example, if you've never been on ice before and you step on ice, like let's say it's ice hockey, let's say you're going to go and like maybe you never, like let's say if you went, maybe we can even get into like rollerblading. Let's say you rollerblade, but you've never been on ice and you never, like, is there some skill transfer? 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Is it also very different? Like, yes. And you can go and ask people that play roller hockey compared to ice hockey, right? Like there's different skills you got to be able to have. There's different stability that you need to be able to have. Like even too, like if you've never experienced that specifically, even the brain, right? Like if you go out on the ice tomorrow after you went on today, you're going to be better than you were yesterday, because it now has an idea of the affordance and the environment and what I need to do. Now you compound that over 10 years, you compound that over a lifetime of training. Yeah, like a baseball player competing against someone that has never played baseball before is going to have grossly different adaptations compared to obviously the average guy that's sitting at a cubicle, obviously as well. So what would you say, like specifically to like, we talked about this a little bit last time, but I think this is a good topic since we're kind of there, is like transfer, right? Because you talk a lot about that too as well. It's like the whole reason like I'm in the weight room is to have better field performance.
Right.
It's not to be the most Olympic, like we're not here to be the strongest guys, right? If it doesn't transfer to the field, like what are we doing? So I think that's the same thing as like kind of open that up. Like how do you think that in those ways that, and again, this doesn't have to be just with that as well, but maybe just touch on the topic of that, of like the transfer and some of the things that I know that you value from that side too.
I mean, that's a very large question. But, going back to the whole ice analogy, like you have passive ranges of motion, you have active ranges of motion. Just generally standing on ground, like think about the position that you're standing in and think about the fact that you're not even thinking about standing in that position, right? Mm-hmm. But as soon as you step on the ice, you actively are now standing on the ground. So, you open this with what's the difference between, why is it so hard for me, I guess, to go from a bilateral, so a squat pattern, to a single, maybe a pistol squat, right? Like, why is that so hard? Is like, you're taking stability away from the body, right? Yeah. And the body's always going to pull towards the point of stability. Yeah. So, we talk about
before you run past that, what can you unpack that a little bit more? Like, I think that's a very important point when you say like it's going to pull towards that. Like, what is it? Can go a layer deeper with that.
So let's just say like I have one leg on the ground. when I go down to do an RDL,
Mhm.
like as I'm like going down, my foot is anchoring into the ground
Yeah.
because that's the only point of stability that I have.
Yeah.
So you think about a swing, like the entirety of a swing, both feet aren't on the ground, right?
yeah.
So like as you're rotating into your front side, it's extremely important to be able to maintain that front leg from blowing just straight out to the outside, right? Like
Yeah.
it's extremely important to be able to hold that position. So as you rotate into that front side, like the more stability that you have in that front leg, the more aggressively you'll be able to pull into it. And again, this is a great like thing to talk about is like, you think about the weight room, like all we work on typically in the weight room, like a good training program is well balanced, but like all you really see with programs, from what my experience is, there's a lot of gas pedal and not a lot of brake.
Yeah.
Right.
Amen.
Like we'll just start there, and that's,
sure.
That's really what we're trying to train is like the brakes are eccentric movements and the gas pedals are concentric movements, right? You brought up Muay Thai. It's like I need to be fast in short windows. So, you have to have a balance of eccentric strength and concentric strength. You can't just give this athlete a gas pedal and more horsepower, but yet don't give them a brake and a good chassis, right? Like, so I think that that's extremely important concept is like, you need to be able to have that eccentric strength in all planes of motion, sagittal, frontal, transverse, like those, they're all happening at once. So it's like, you need to train those. And so the transfer of training becomes that type of mindset is like, I'm either working this athlete through phases or I'm sprinkling into my program throughout their progression. Right.
Yeah. And I also think the other thing is for any type of striking sport, one thing that people forget too, I got to be able to hit you when I'm not in ideal positions.
Right.
When I'm out of position.
Unpredictable.
Yeah, it's unpredictable. I see an opening that you have, right? Like I can't put my arm back and get a full shot off. I might be able to, boom, hit you with a little, jab or hit you with a quick uppercut or whatever, right? Or all of a sudden do a real low kick because I see you out of position and I can strike you. Hitting's the same way as well, right? Like there's a ball coming at you at, 90 plus miles an hour, moving, driving, all these other things. Like I'm not going to be perfect.
Right.
Most of the time, the best hitters in the world, like they're out of position too, right? Like we're all fighting to be in the perfect position, but we're not. Like it's unpredictable, right? Like again, we don't know the pitch he's throwing, right? We don't know what's going on, and we're reacting to a ball. And even if you know what pitch he's throwing, do you know exactly how many inches it's going to break?
Yeah.
And again, like, okay, it broke half an inch less than it did before. Like how adjustable are you, right? It went a little bit more vertical that time. It went a little bit more horizontal. Like it gyroed or it turned into a cement mixer. And usually he has a nasty breaking slider that breaks 10 inches. And instead this time it actually spun back towards you. And like, can you hit that, right? And so I think, and again, like you have very small windows of time to be able to, do that. And that's the skilled component. That's like being a hitter, as everybody would say, right? Like not just a swinger. Like great, you in an arcade, again, like the thing's sitting there, the ball's sitting on the tee, whatever, right? I can just create all this force. The ball's not moving. It's very predictable. But like, I'm only worried about me. But when you're fighting against something that's real reactive, I got to be able to do that. And I was thinking about this. This is all you, because I was this morning when I was shadowboxing at the park out there like Rocky, right? I started doing that, and so one of the things they talked about was like I saw this boxing coach the other day was talking about this, and so I was feeling this when I was actually shadowboxing today, is this boxing coach was talking about in basketball, as a defender, you're constantly trying to cut angles and get in front of the person that's trying to get past you, right? And the better that the other person is at angling, right, to get you off balance, to get you shifted.
Their movement.
Exactly, right? And you can do that. Well, in boxing, it's the same way, right? I'm constantly trying to get him out of position. We're both fighting for position.
Yeah.
Right. And as soon as I get a window, an opening, I'm going to pop you. Right. And like and sometimes I'm throwing punches not to hurt you, but to get you out of position. So like, for example, in Muay Thai, I'll throw a hook to get the guy off balance, and then I'll kick him in the head with my right on the opposite side. Right. So I'm hitting him with the left hook and then kicking him in the head with my right.
Catch me outside.
Catch me outside. What's up? Right. But like you're doing that. Right. And again, like that's the skilled component of it. Right. Is like understanding that. Along with it is like a lot of it is battling for positioning, and we should see that again. The pitcher and the hitter, we're battling for angles and positioning, right?
Your body is too independently.
Yes.
From that, right?
Yes, 100%.
And you think about too, like training your swing in the cage. Like I see so many hitters get so frustrated because like it's not that they can't figure out the move, they can't get the result that they want.
Yep.
And think about this, dude, is you can't even get that result and you're on a flat surface without cleats and not stepping into somebody else's
Yes.
hole.
No fans, no
Nothing, bro.
coaches, game's not on the line.
Nope.
All the things, like, you're just,
Yeah, and the better that you're trained in your environment, the more adaptable you'll be, and the less at risk for injury you're going to be as well.
for
So
sure.
knowing your environment, knowing how your training is matching that, it might not necessarily have to be sport specific, but like
Yeah.
these are just overlooked things in those larger compound movement programs,
For
right?
sure.
So
sure.
that's a huge part. Like I spent a lot of time with rehab guys. Like
Yeah.
the last 3 years of my life were
Mhm.
involved with rehab, and it's like my job wasn't just to get this player back to baseline. It was to get him like past his baseline,
Yeah.
improve performance, but also to be able to go from 0 to 100 at the blink of an eye, right?
Well, and like you said, his baseline got him hurt. Where he was before he got hurt was like maybe he didn't have strength in that
Or
area.
he wasn't adaptable to his environment, right?
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
that's
for
kind
sure.
of my point, is like the
Yeah.
adaptability within it. And we talk a little bit about like intent with the water balls and things like that. Like
Mm.
there's so much adaptability that you have to have. What's the degrees of freedom?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Bernstein.
yeah, and so
Mhm.
like you look at, just let's talk about a skater jump side to side, right? Like
Yep.
you can do a skater jump with a dumbbell, you can do it without a dumbbell, you can do it with a band,
Yeah.
but what vector of pull they're all coming from, right?
For sure.
With the water ball, you don't.
It's not predictable.
No,
Yeah, it's
and
hard.
so like you think about stepping on uneven surfaces and cleats, hard sand, soft grass, like
Mhm.
running towards the ball on the foul line. Like again, we're talking about little stabilization muscles in the foot, in the hip,
Yeah.
in the low back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's like the water ball is just, again, we talked last podcast, low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
This is just it's just an addition to a program. It doesn't
sure.
need to be the whole program.
No.
You can add it into your warm ups. You can add it into your workouts. You
For
can,
sure.
you can even make a conditioning program out of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I've seen you spend some time with the water ball, and that's your workout.
For sure.
And it's okay. And
Yeah.
we've put together a program for that as well, right? And
For
it's
sure.
like these programs aren't like based off of like getting you bigger, faster, stronger. We're trying to improve the brakes, and then you're going to layer on the gas pedal down the road.
For
right?
sure. Yeah, and I also think this other thing is, again, it's another way of when you're training to be mindful of those ratios. Like, so for example,
That's
like,
huge.
right, it's big.
Balance.
As much as force I can create, well, I better
Mhm.
be able to stabilize it.
Your
Why-
body's going to only accelerate what it can deaccelerate.
Yeah, and especially if this, I would say even a compound the opposite way. If I put you in a constrained environment where I need you to stop even harder than you accelerated in, which again, a lot of times in sport, you better be able to stop. Like again, like a basketball player, great, you can get up to speed, all that stuff, but the faster he can decel and juke,
That's your RSI.
yeah, yes, exactly. And then the other thing as well, it's like, for example, like we look at like kinematics and we look at how hard can I whip, stop the whip. Well, the brakes, right? Like how hard can I stop my pelvis? How hard can I stop my trunk? How hard can like that is my power, right? Because that's how much energy I can get into the barrel, right? And then again, my bat speeds will go up. All those other things will go up. And then also too, not only bat speeds, but also everybody looks at bat speed. You got to remember, the difference between speed and velocity is velocity has a vector. Speed does not have a vector.
Right.
So because of that, when we look at that, we just say bat speed. Well, speed is, again, like it's very different compared to, for example, this is the why it's important. Overall speed is great, right? But vectors are very important when it comes into velocity, because that's how we measure momentum. Momentum needs a vector.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't, again, when you want to look at momentum and transfer of momentum and why guys are hitting the ball so hard with lower bat speeds, it's because you look at velocities and that vector and how they're getting energy and when, and then you look at that from a momentum perspective is like, yeah, like we just want to look at things and make it so easy. And it's like, oh, more bat speed, more extra velocity. And like,
Yeah.
that's not always the case, right? And also too, it doesn't mean that speed's a bad thing, but like how we train it and all of those things and how easily can I create speed.
Mhm.
And I think that's like, again, in what small windows of time, great, you can create it, but you got also acceleration. There's a lot of ways of measuring speed. Now you add a time component, right? Over what period of time can I actually create that? Time to contact. Again, how late can I wait? Right? How quick am I?
Right.
Right? All of those things as well, like gets into it within the skill as well. And then going back to that shadow boxing thing I was telling you about this morning was I had realized the same thing when I was shadow boxing. And like when you shadow box, if you're not into fighting, you visualize someone actually fighting you, right? You're not just out there just throwing punches or whatever. Like someone's throwing at you and you're, changing directions and you're creating punches and angles and you're doing that. But what I realized is like, for example, is when I was reacting, I had to create, right, where like a co-contraction, the stabilizing and like a weird joint angle. Like it's not ideal, but I needed stability in my hip in that one little weird angle with some flexion with, like I'm in this weird angle so I could pop this hook to his body. That is this the most powerful hook I could throw? No. But within this window, like I can hit him hard enough. And I land 3 of those and I again, or I get them off balanced or I do whatever. And then I can land a power shot. Not every shot, right? And not everything I do on the field is pure power, right? And it could be fielding ground balls. It could be, again, running in the outfield. It could be when I'm in the box, like when I'm striding. That is not the most powerful lateral movement that I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to jump to the pitcher as hard as I can. So like when we're understanding that, like there's just like these weird joint angles and there's like, towards in ranges or even too, like just weird things that you're not going to get when you're just like sitting in a bus or like everyday life or you're in a weight room doing a casual squat or something like that. Like some basic things is like, yes, there is some specificity to like the exact, some of these things you have to do when you're actually on the field and you're training. And yes, you know what? Well, then somebody will say, well, why can't you just do all that stuff when you're hitting or doing X, Y, and Z? Well, guess what? When there's a skill component and there's a ball coming at you, that changes the whole task, right? And, again, we can't do it as hard. We can't focus on the actual movement. We can't focus on the actual skill and tax it out because now we're messing up his swing rather than, let's add a load with some water bags. Let's do some other reps. Like I can get way more rotation in when they don't have to hit a ball, right? And I don't have to worry about, and maybe I want a higher intent with, again, maybe I'm going to do it for time. Maybe I can challenge the system in some different ways. Maybe I can put, an opponent against them that they're competing and we can challenge those things and get more of that work in without having, a bat. It's things you just can't do with the bat. And also too, college coach, high school coach. Okay, let's say you're in the NCAA. How much time do you have? Right? And then also too, like you don't want them to have bad reps and bad swings and all this stuff. So we can handle that outside the cage. Also too, we have one cage in here, right? A lot of schools don't have an outdoor cage. A lot of places, they only have 2 coaches on staff. They only have these other things, right? So now you create an opportunity where, hey, like we can get some work in, make, put this as a station, make them do other things. Like not everything is ideal. We don't have an unlimited budget. There's a lot of schools that have 2-3 weight racks in their whole school. Right. And it's like, okay, what are we going to do? Right. How do we get these guys stronger? How do we, get some other adaptations without them just all these guys being meatheads and walking around here like football players and, and again, like, great, they could probably play football pretty good. Like, but that's not what we're trying to have them do. Right. And so now that none of them can rotate and then think about it. Okay. When we go talk about, most coaches, let's be honest here, also a lot of schools, they don't even have a strength coach. They have this, your infield coach is also your strength coach, right? And so he's building these programs and like they do almost nothing in the nothing transverse, like nothing rotational. They don't add, and we talked about this, you don't need water bags to make something rotational, right? But a lot of people, when they think about rotation, they go, it's just med balls. Okay, throw a med ball as hard as I can. And that's the only thing that they do, right? Or they do a pal off or they do rotations with a band or something. Like it's like basic, these things. But there's a billion variations that I've seen you do, that we do, right? That add, all these different planes of motion like into it. But I think that's another way as well. It's like, if you don't have that tool in your toolbox to be able to like challenge, instability within rotation, and also too, like the med ball thing, like you talked about, is a lot of people, there's very little eccentrics. Like people are literally just doing concentric type movements, throwing the med ball. And
if that's your intent for that portion of the program, great. But like, I guarantee you a lot of those coaches that are putting that stuff out there, like the ones that I've seen that I know personally, like that's a specific phase that they're doing that in. They're not just giving it to an athlete. They've already done the eccentric phase. They've already put the brakes on this player, and now they're trying to move things as fast and as hard as they can, right?
For sure.
I do, that all being said, I do very much value strength. base level strength and advanced strength. The
Yep.
way I kind of look at it is that's your main course, right? Whereas
sure.
the water balls and like I like the word that you use is it's a tool, right? Like
Yeah.
these are condiments
Yeah,
to
yeah,
me, right?
For sure.
So I'm not basing a whole program around, water balls and things like that. They're just condiments to
For
the
sure.
food. I don't want dry food. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, for sure.
I want my food to be flavorful and I want it to taste good and I want it to have a little sauce on it.
For sure.
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing is like you're saying as well. Like, okay, great. We might be okay, put it this way. We might be doing squats. Okay. You add a water bag to it. It's like a hot dog, right? Like your hot dog. Okay, you got the hot dog. Like you put the water bag on their back, right? You put an unstable load on the, and again, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing barbell. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do any of those other things, right? And maybe it's with a superset. Maybe it's these other things, right? And again, like this is coming from a guy that was a meathead when I was training, right? Like that's how I like to train. I also saw the downfalls of training like a meathead, right? I like trying to be a bodybuilder when I trained. Well, like trying to do all these other things, which again, in majority across the nation, is how most people are training, right? And
I mean, let me ask you this: how often, like on the force plates, have you seen a big, strong dude have low exit velocity?
a big, strong dude.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
it's
I mean,
common, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
like, that guy's brakes
Yeah.
are not quality.
yeah. And not only that, like I said, there's so many things that come, like force and transmitting force is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a technique, there's a skill component to it. There's things that you have to teach your body that you're not going to get in a day. You're not going to get in a week. You're not going to get like years of training and like getting, like, for example, like I think it's the same way as like we talked about this as well. Like I've trained my CNS to do everything right now. Right? Like I can pick up right now, I could walk in the room, probably pick up 400 something pounds. I haven't done it in a really long time. Every once in a while I'll just, be He-Man and I'll just go, do the thing. But again, when I say that is, but when the chart, they used to always have the chart. If you can lift this once, you should be able to lift this 10 times.
Yeah.
My body, whoever made that chart didn't meet my body. And I think you could have a whole reasons of why that
You signed your waiver.
Yeah. All the things. Yeah. But I would look at that and go the same thing. It's like, no. Like I didn't train my body, or again, for Usain Bolt is not out there running a, 46-mile marathon. Like he's trained his body to be elite.
Boy's training in the pool, bro.
Yeah.
He's training in the pool.
Like he's trained his body to be elite at what he's trying to do. And then a marathon runner that's trying to go the longest distance in the world and be the most elite the opposite way, he's trained his body to be elite. And it wasn't a year. It wasn't two, like they've trained for years.
Mm-hmm.
And the adaptations and the asymmetries and all the things that they've built to be the most elite at that skill or at that skill or at that skill. Like again, the top football player in the world most likely isn't going to be the top baseball player in the world. And the top, this is not going to be the top that. Now, again, is there going to be every once in a while, are you going to get your Bo Jacksons, right? Are you going to get your, our boys Prime? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you going to get those guys for sure? But again, like, was Prime Mike Trout? No, right? Like, again, like even Bo Jackson, like, was he Mike Trout? No. Was he a freak athlete that, again, like Bo knows, like for sure. But at the same time, like, again, if you're going to be the most elite in both like sports, like is there overlap? For sure. Yes. But when you're training to be the best in the world at something, it's like there is going to be adaptations that are specific towards, one sport, that sport,
That's
or
your
whatever.
sport specific training, right?
Yeah,
like
for sure.
People hate on sport specific training, but typically what I've seen is people that haven't or don't train high level athletes at their sport aren't fans of sport specific training, right?
Yeah. They're like, they don't have the lowest stuff.
That's just the training age, right? Like a younger guy might not need a whole lot of sport specific training with him. Like he might need basic foundation of general strength, right? General prep program. But the higher that youth athlete gets and the older that he gets, he's going to have to close that gap a little bit more and more and more at each level that he gets to, right? And it's like that athlete's training age, if he starts at 13, 14, 15, that just jumped 7, 8, 9 years with him. And now he's 23 playing in the big leagues, right? Like, are you just going to do basic stuff with that guy? Are you going to continue to lock his body up? Or are you going to start to, make him more adaptable to his environment? And I feel like that's where this tool comes into play.
Yeah. And also too, the other thing is, okay, me and you have the same program, right? We're younger, basic level stuff, all this other, okay, great. We have the same program. How you adapt and how I adapt to that same program
Mm-hmm.
is going to be very different.
Right.
And again, I might start cheating with, my adductors, or I might start doing, my body has a different structure. It's going to, maybe I'm doing something slightly different. Or also, too, I like to play pickleball, or I like to ride my bike a lot, or I like to do these other things. I'm not just doing that, right? Like, maybe I like to swim. Maybe I'm a gymnast. Maybe, maybe I play outfield. You play infield, and you take 1,000 reps at shortstop, and I take 1,000 reps in left field, picking my nose. We're going to have different, adaptations to our body too, as well. And then you're going to have to build. And again, we'll look at the program and go, oh, hey, like, you need more of this. Like, you need more of this, because how you've adapted and these other things that you're doing also are going to change, as well. And like, and I think that that's a bigger component too of like, and also too, then you got genetics just from the get go, right? Like, I know some guys, dude, I don't know if you had any teammates like this. I played with guys. It's like, bro, he never lifts and he's jacked. Like, it just used to piss me off. I'm like, bro, you work out like 1 day a week and you're huge.
Yeah.
And then, again, strong as hell, like athletic as hell. And it's like, bro, you don't even step in the weight room. And then I had other guys that are like gym junkies and like, they're also jacked, right? And then I also have guys that work out a ton and like program wise, and like, they're not really that big, right? Like, but they're strong, or they're, like they all that. And so I think that that's like another thing as well. It's like, yeah, like genetics obviously have a play. Like, for example, when you go into like certain sports, like if you go like NBA, for example, dude, like there's some guys like, dude, like, again, let's just go the extremes. If your whole family has been sumo wrestlers, there's a good chance that you're not going to be a jockey, right? It's just like, just genetically, you're just way predisposed to like crazy different structures, right? And it's like the same thing in like NBA. Like the odds of you making the NBA without being over 6 foot, it's just, again, like the sport, like, again, now how I train and all that stuff, could I also increase some of that stuff, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But like, there's a lot of guys just like, dude, like, again, like your body and your structure is going to be very different. And again, you're going to have to train very different compared to, if both your parents aren't over, 5'8", right? Like you're going to have different things. I don't know how tall Jose Altuve's parents are, but I'm going to bet, hopefully. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I would bet that they're, again, it doesn't mean that you can't play the sport, but again, how many Jose Altuve's do you know?
Yeah.
Like, he's a freak. Like Jose Altuve, again, like there's a lot of things that have to come together. Like, again, he's really strong in different ways though, right? Like, I don't think Jose Altuve is going to go in there and set a deadlift record. I don't think he's going to go in there and set a squat record.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, he's strong. Like, and also connective tissue, and like you can see it by, and again, like with it, for example, if we want to measure how strong somebody is from a connective tissue standpoint, like we have some things that we could measure that we'd be like, well, like that would lead us to believe, but like in reality though, along with it, like we still have so far long, like so many things, so many layers to go, where like we still can't measure a lot of things that we know to be important, right? Or we believe to be important, but like we just, science needs to keep going, right? Like we need to find other ways to, need to test some of these things. And like some of these things are not targeted enough, right? Like, yeah, like this would mean that yes as well, but it also means that there's a lot of other things. Like they might just be really strong in this way. And like, again, like I said, there's only so many tests that we have available that we can currently measure that are reasonable also as well, like within a training environment or, again, like with athletes going up and down in levels, like, some of that stuff too.
Yeah. There's a lot of subjective feedback out there.
Agreed.
And again, that subjective feedback comes from wisdom and experience, right?
For sure.
Like we talked about that, but objectively there are things that are available to us. The force plates, I've talked about those quite a bit, and it's like, when we write programs, we're going to the force plates to confirm that they're working or they're not.
Yep.
Right. And sometimes they don't work and sometimes they're okay.
Yeah.
But those are we call them key performance indicators, KPIs, right? Like you have them with the K vest, you have them with the force plates, you have them in the weight room, like you have them on the field, you have them in game, like there's KPIs everywhere, right? And those are kind of your objective measures that you're holding yourself accountable to.
For sure.
And I think that the more that we grow as an industry, the more that we're open to as an industry, like closed-mindedness isn't going to solve any problems, right? So it's like everybody's out here just trying their very best, and everybody's if you truly care about what you're doing and you truly care about your athletes, you're going to go find some answers, right? And it's like it's important for you yourself to have your own KPIs, to hold yourself accountable, to hold your program accountable, and make sure that you're you're directing these players in the right direction, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, if you're not, at least you have something to fall back on and be like, okay, I need to intervene here, right?
Yep.
And like, that's the growth that you start to see as you start to get more into the training side of things. Because
Yeah.
like you said, there are genetics that play into sports, and specifically in MLB. I can't tell you how many athletes I've came across that didn't do anything, and they were healthy, they hit above 300, and they were ballers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those dudes were genetically built to play baseball.
Yeah.
I know my body, if I would have lasted through college, I probably wouldn't have lasted through the minor leagues.
Yeah.
bro.
Yeah. Too many.
It's
Yeah,
an
my body would fall
absolute
apart.
grind. It's an absolute grind,
Yeah.
man. And
Yeah.
like, but I've also seen the opposite side where guys lift themselves out of the game.
Yeah.
And that's like, to me, that's heartbreaking, because as
You're
a
working
strength
hard.
coach, yeah,
Yeah.
I love the effort. I love the attitude. I love the intensity. But also, too, like, I see the underlying things
Yeah.
that are being broken down.
Yeah.
And those are easy fixes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that
Well,
player,
it's also one thing I used to tell some of these pro guys about. Look, this game takes discipline, and some of that discipline is go to bed, don't lift, recover, eat your food,
yeah,
make sure you're not scrolling on social media at night. Like, again, like get up in the morning. Like, you need to go to Pilates. You need to, again, like you need to be going through your mobility routine. Like you
you can't
need
drive in the garage, park your car, and leave the car on, go to sleep, wake up the next morning.
for sure.
Expect the battery to be
For
there.
sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot that plays into it, man. And
Yeah.
I think you hit on quite a few big points with it as well.
Yeah. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to hit on with that as well is, again, like, look, I coach at those levels. Like, I, again, understand it. Like, a lot of these coaches, again, are also asked to be the strength coach, and they're just trying to, like, put things together. Also, too, like, along with it, like, dude, you're recruiting. You're spending all this time away from your family. Like, yeah, I mean, you're working through, you're trying to be dad. You're trying to be husband. You're
Wearing
trying to
many
be
different hats.
Yeah, you're wearing all these things, right? And so and then also too, you're traveling. You have no access to a weight room. You have no access to all these other things, and like you're working within the constraints. And also the other coaches in your league are doing the same thing, and you guys are all trying to work within the constraints that are available, right? And so you guys, again, especially you JUCO grinders out there, you JUCO bandits out there, right? Like you guys are grinding the NAIA teams, like at every level, right? D2, D3. We did the game documentary that we have coming out this week. We talked about that a lot. Right. We talked about that as well. It's like all of them talked about all these things that even too at, like, for example, like let's say you're at the highest level, Power Fives. Well, you have a constraint of junior college. Dude, we used to train if the sun was out, like we were training. You know what I'm saying? Like we were out, I had 5-6 hour practices. Like it was, again, probably too much. Right. But with that being said, right, at NCAA, they have the opposite. They have very limited time windows where they need to get all these adaptations and get them as trained as much as they can within these really small windows. So like, we're talking to, your LSUs, your Clemsons, your all the things. You're like, oh, well, they have the best of the best, and they have their own strength coaches, and they have all these other things. Yeah, but they also have requirements, right? They have to hit these windows and get as much as they can in very small windows of time, where like a lot of other levels, good, we could get done with practice and go over here, and then like, again, they could train for another 2 hours and they could do all these other things. And it's like, those are really, development like levels comparatively to there. It's like they have these other constraints. So like, that's why we also talked about that. It's like, okay. And one of the ideas that originally, recently came up was, I was like, okay, like I played at that level. You played the same thing too. You played junior college, you played NAIA, like we both played at those levels. And like looking at that and going like, all right, I remember what that looked like. I remember going to another school and us not having, like there no weights. There's nothing for us to get access to, like all that stuff throughout the year. And we're trying to, all the guys lost 30 pounds by the end of the year or whatever. Right. And these guys were eating like crap. We got $5 budgets that the guys are trying to get us to get food from, just all of these things. And we're like, all right, so like, could we create a resource that could help these guys? Like, can we create a resource that could help, coaches that are in this situation that don't have, they can't haul, like even the recent thing, I know you probably saw it online where they were building these trailers that the coaches could haul behind the truck so they could like work out and like stay on the road. Yeah. But still, for a lot of programs, that's not reasonable. They can't tow, a trailer across the, thing, safety, all these other things. They can't even afford the trailer. Let's just start there. And we're like, okay, like, what are things that we can do? And it's like, yeah, like in select scenarios, like certain tools become much more useful to you just because like, great,
How'd the TRX get invented, bro?
Yes.
Military dude.
Yeah.
Just hung some straps off a Hummer.
Yeah, it's like
Trying
that's
to get
all
a
I
workout
got.
in, bro.
Yeah, this is all I got. I didn't know that story. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's all I got, right? And I think that that's the same thing. It's like, okay, or at home workouts, like, yo, I got 20 minutes. I got like, dude, at the house, I tell you this all the time. It's like, dude, I'll get home and be like, dude, I don't have the time to go to the gym right now and do all these things. Like, I gotta get to bed, I gotta get back to work, I gotta do these things. Like, I got 2 water bags at the house, and like, sometimes, again, I probably need to use them more, honestly. But like, yeah, like I'll hit something real quick for 10, 15 minutes, or, and because you also got to take in as well, like, again, like some of these guys, like you're trying to keep their tissue like healthy, like you're trying to do other things where it's like, it's, I always said too, it's like a lot of times it's like getting some load, right?
Yeah.
Comparatively to getting nothing. And then also,
I just had that conversation with you yesterday.
you did. You did. Yeah, you did.
On a
So
personal level.
Yeah, 100%. Right. And just, I have different constraints, right? I'm at a different time in my life. Same thing too. We talked about this, like, and you've been really good of helping me kind of unpack like some of the constraints that I've had, again, me personally.
I don't know how you find time for anything, bro,
Well,
to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the love and
yeah.
support. But yeah, I just wanted to give you kind of a second there. We've been working on this resource specifically more for like high school, those type of programs that really have some, struggle. And they're like, man, like, again, like I'm not a strength coach. Like we don't have access to all this stuff. Like it's not an ideal situation. But at the same time, like a little bit of help would be dramatic for these programs. Again, for Farm Plus, again, like it's only $20 a month. There's a lot of, coaches and parents and things like that are just trying to like get some general, base level stuff that could help them in those type of environments and those setups. And so I know that we've been developing that resource. It's something that you've been heading on, just like a project to help, like these communities. And so I just wanted to give you kind of a second to kind of like open that up and kind of like what's coming.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about it. I've never put anything together like this. So it's more of like a hypertrophy, endurance.
Yeah,
type
I gave you a lot of challenges. I'm like, okay, look, this is the thing. Like, act like this in all these crazy scenarios. He's like, okay, so we're basically at war. You give the Army example. It's like, all right, like being coaching in a JC or an NAI can feel sometimes like you're at war and you're just trying to make things work. So, anyways, we try to develop the resource, and like I challenged Steve, and he came up with something pretty cool. So
yeah, no, I actually had a lot of fun with it. Kind of made it, a high school kid could do it, a youth athlete could do it. You could throw it into your college program. It's kind of got a couple different uses too. You'll be able to split it up and use it as warm-ups if you need to. But we're definitely focusing on planes of motion with the use of the water bags, the the water balls, the water bags, and the Bulgarian bag. So there's a variety of different ways that you can use things in there. And if you only have access to one, you can still do all of them.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited for that to pop out. But yeah, I think just in general, like if you don't have anything, like this is just an easy place to start. And if it's also not something that you have to follow to a T, like if you just want to pop in for a quick total body, like you have the option to do that. Or if, it's definitely not geared towards anything strength. If anything, it's more dynamic and stability involved. Yeah. But I also think that, again, we talked about low hanging fruit. Like that's probably a term that we'll use often. Like you can do this on the baseball field pregame, postgame with nothing but the water bag.
Yeah.
That's it. Like you don't need a whole lot of stuff. You can use it as a warm up if you need to. You can change it. Yeah, you
hotel
absolutely.
Parking lot, just hitting
You could change the intensities with it. Like it's a basic enough program, but it's also got some specific stuff in it that'll help you become more adaptable to your environment.
Yeah, no, I love that. And again, like just to clarify on that same side, like it also speaks to just like how your brain works and like, hey man, like I think also your background of you played at those levels and know these constraints and being like, man, those are a lot of constraints that I kind of challenge you with of like, yo, like I know this is hard, but like, again, like it's hard for the coaches. Like it's hard for them when they're like, what am I supposed to do? Like I don't have a barbell. We don't have all these other things. We can't travel with all these weights. Yeah. Like, it is a pain in the ass. Like we don't have a bunch of room. We don't have, all these other things. And like, again, like water bags are a cool tool. Like where they're, like I think about it, like I used to work on dirt bikes and stuff when I was younger. And then also too, like when I was in school, in high school, we worked on cars, and it's like, sometimes to get to a certain bolt, it's like, there's a lot of crap in the way. And there's like, man, if it was like this, I could just use a socket, or if it was just like this, I could do this, or I could just do that. And like, we had to come up with some really creative ways, and like, there's specialty tools that they use this specialty tool. And it's like, man, when you have this one tool, like this is done in 2 seconds, like done. Right. And so I think that that's the same thing too, is like, yo, like for those types of constraints, like for a bag that's like, dude, like the bag folds up into like, you know, the size of your hand. Like you can get this really small bag. It's so easy to travel with you can put them in a whole bunch of them inside of a bag, a big duffel bag or something. You need access to water, right? Which is like, I hope you have access for your players to get water, right? You could just need to put some water in them. Sometimes when we travel, when we get on the planes and everything, like I put it underneath the plane, right? Like check the bag, keep the water in it. All I do is literally just pump it up, boom, seal it, and then we start using it within 10 minutes. Like
when I was in the minor leagues, dude, we were filling those up in the shower.
There you go. Right? There you go. Right. And I think that's the same thing, right? It's just like, hey, like they can be a specialty tool. Like, you know, again, they travel well, they pack well.
The other thing too with them is you can change the load, right?
Yes.
Like you can go super light, or you can fill that thing up.
Yeah. You could use it more like a really heavy implement if you needed, and that was the goal, right? Like,
again, intent does matter, and what you want out of the workout, like you're going to get out of it. And we'll have different options on there, sets and rep schemes. And, you know, you could just pop in for a quick total body. And like, if you don't have access to any, like me personally, I lifted almost every day, whenever I was playing. And then on the weekends, like I didn't feel as primed for my games. So I would go out there and I would do like more of like my personal active warm up type thing, to where I was throwing a couple med balls, you know, rapidly turning a couple rubber bands and things like that. So, you know, I also do think that you can split those supersets up super easy and use those as primers before you get out there and start throwing.
And also not a bad resource for something that you already have access to Farm Plus, and it's just another thing that we're putting on there as another resource right on top of there as well. I think that's like a huge thing there as well. So hopefully, again, we just wanted to help and like add on to just people that are kind of working through some of these constraints, and like, you know, help from there. And
give us your feedback, guys. Let us know how we can make things better.
Yeah, and what we could add, and other resources on the Farm Plus there as well. So yeah, definitely from that. But yeah, let me pray us out. We'll go from there. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time we spent with you. God, we just hope that these resources and these things that we're creating just help spread your kingdom, God, and just also just help people. And that's our main intention. And we just pray that you continue to keep our hearts open to where we can serve and how we can help people. And we just pray that everybody receive these gifts and blessings in ways that you're working through us. And we just hope that we're your hands and feet, and we're an extension of you, God. And we just pray all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. 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 Well, until next time, Farm System out.